And we can, so this is just going to be a community recording. There's no one here is speaking officially. So, you know, our corporate masters could disavow everything we've said, and it's what we do about it. We're going to do our best with our knowledge to answer your questions. Fair enough?
Yes.
All right. So first piece of advice I have is write down your questions. So that way you can listen to everybody without having to like reserve part of your brain to remembering what your question was going to be. So let's take a second and write down your question or questions. And then if whoever is the location host would just be master of ceremonies and stage the questions in, that'd be great.
So go around the room. I think Eugene has a few questions, like right out of the gates.
You know, I had some technical questions, but I guess, I mean, Thomas, we discussed this issue for block producers backup. And I remember you mentioned something that you guys are planning to work on this solution. When you know, let's say block producer is running a main node, and in case that, you know, power outage or whatever it goes offline, there will be a backup that will, you know, automatically be take a block producer role, which may be at a different, you know, geographic location of different computers that will be linked basically. Or some, you know, so I just wonder if development team is working on any solution or not.
Right, failover. So whoever's not speaking, please mute yourself. That'd be both Bart and Phil, and as well as me. And so for failover, the challenge, just so everyone understands, is we've got one person with the producer key, one machine that's signing things. And if two machines both think like, I'm that, you might double sign. They might both try to provide the same block. And then you look like a clown or a fraudster, and the chain punishes you because you were being a good citizen with a standby. And that's happened before on other chains. So the trick is, how do you keep the standby in standby state, but jumping in really quickly to take over? And the short answer is, I'm not entirely sure, but we do know that the problem exists and we have a ticket for it. And I think, Bart, do you have that answer, or is that Phil?
We do have a ticket to investigate this. Right now, we are not investigating any solution that would require us to support multiple block signing keys for a producer. So the one caveat here is that for any kind of a hot spare or master slave scenario that we cook up, which I fully believe that we'll be able to do and support, it will require a questionable security practice of copying the private key that's used to sign the block onto multiple locations, which just kind of increases the attack surface for exfiltrating that private key. So that is that's kind of where we're going with it right now, and this will probably come down to more standard operational practices, you know, some sort of heartbeat between the two instances so that one knows when it can take over. We do need to provide some plumbing on the node software that would respect something, a signal or an input of some sort that lets it know that it's gone from being a hot spare to the master based on some sort of other infrastructure piece, like a heartbeat daemon or something like that. That's what we're planning on offering. If that's insufficient, and we are really worried about the security implications of having to have that private key accessible to multiple machines, then that is something that would require chain level changes. So that would be something that would require a hard fork in order to support after the launch. And so there's a considerable incentive to learn if there's high value in that now, so we can start discussing whether it's worth pushing in now or whether it's something we'd have to hard fork in later.
And I'll add that longer term, when we go to clustering and multi-threading and so on, a single block producer will be multiple machines, and they can swap each other out and replace their own numbers and transparently. But that's a future and might also be a hard fork. It's not June.
The other thing that I'll also note is that before launch, we are planning on giving you the ability to host the private key that signs a block outside of the process space of the the node that actually does the calculations for the block. Again, for security reasons, so that no matter what happens, there's no way to exfiltrate your private key. So in situations where you want geographic redundancy, that still probably leads to you storing that same private key in multiple places, because if your private key node goes down, you would want redundancy on that. But it might be possible to host simply the signing process on a different machine, so long as you've established trust out of band on your personal producer network or whatever, which gives you the ability to have redundant heavy lifting nodes that are actually doing the calculations, all feeding back to a single signing node that's kind of acting as your secure enclave. And I know we're going to support that before launch, because that's just standard security practices. But again, it doesn't solve the problem of what happens when that node goes down and having the private key in multiple places. So again, we need to have a conversation with the block producer candidates and see if supporting multiple signing keys per producer is actually a high enough value to put the technical risk on the blockchain, for June.
Phil, anything you need to add to that?
Well, I could say that, like Bart said, this is a hot topic, and we're working on rolling out the ignition sequence for the blockchain now, and security and chain, or security and private key transport is very front and center in that planning. So yeah, we should be able to get this. Hopefully, we get this right before June.
Thank you, Phil.
Okay, thank you.
Who's next? You'll need to come up close.
Yes, I guess, did you want to ask me questions?
Let me get close. So should block producers be ready to handle some of the arbitration, like around the chain launch? Like I know there's been a lot of talk about that. Like should we be kind of prepared? And if so, like in what ways?
Right, arbitration, that sounds like me. So the short answer is the default behavior of the software will call on the block producers nominally to arbitrate disputes, which most block producers are not actually technically prepared to do. And we are, the design decision has been made, and we'll see in June if it has stuck by then. Maybe it'll change, but I believe it'll stick. We're going to use the International Center for Dispute Resolution rule set, which is a well-defined, well-tested, works around the world system for both mediation and arbitration. And what that means is you as a block producer could choose to be the appointing authority. And the appointing authority gets to say, you have a dispute. Your arbitrator is going to be that dude. And you just name somebody, and then you're off the hook. And you're probably wondering, yeah, okay, so who do I name? And one of my projects is to spin up not only the arbitration rule set in blockchain-friendly fashion, but to recruit some arbitrators who are trained and experienced who can make their services available. Secondly, I'm normalizing as much as I can amongst the application development groups that they need to come up with arbitration routines and schedules and people, so that if two people using the same service have a dispute, they can turn to somebody within their group and say, you be our arbitrator, and it never gets to the block producer. It should only get to you in the first place if they've failed to do it inside their DApp community. Does that help?
Yeah. Great, yeah.
Did you have a question, G? No.
Hey, my name is Andrew. I had a quick question. So I've been reading the documentation, and there's a statement where it says 15% of issued outstanding tokens need to vote for the main chain to initiate, and that would initiate the transfer of tokens to EOS.
So Bart explained that one to me. Bart, would you explain it again? Or I can take a crack and then you can correct me. I mean, I'm fine with that too.
That's kind of in the governance land, so I'd rather hear what you have to say about it.
All right. Here's what I think I heard from Bart, which again may or may not be what lasts until June, but it's our current best understanding, is that initially when you've got an account and a balance, but there's no transactions, you're essentially, you're less real and it's harder to see you. And it doesn't, you've never logged in, you've never done anything. And so I could like fork the chain and copy the, the snapshot in, in my basement and never even connect to the internet and claim I've got an EOS chain, but no one's connecting to it. And so to have legitimacy, you want to have, we're claiming 15% is the threshold of total tokens. Somebody somewhere has connected to this chain and done a thing, a transfer, anything that leaves a fingerprint or a footprint on the chain, some transaction connected to their user. And when the 15% of tokens are attached to accounts that have done something, meaning they've connected and they've signed a transaction, that is a threshold of this is a legitimate chain. We will now unlock abilities that were previously locked, like paying block producers and allowing transfers of tokens between accounts.
Gotcha.
Q Bart.
User, so I might not know the whole process, but when the chain initiates, it's not EOS's .io responder or block.one's responsibility to initiate that chain. So what would the process be for the mainnet or the main chain to initiate? If you run
The process to which?
To initiate the Genesis block.
Oh, that one's easy. So you're aware that people are getting their ERC20 tokens on Ethereum, and that at 10 p.m. June 2nd, Universal Time, Greenwich Mean Time we used to call that, all those tokens will freeze and no longer be transferable, meaning if you try to take a snapshot after 10 p.m., it won't be a blurry snapshot because the tokens are moving. They'll be locked in place. So starting at 10 p.m. June 2nd, it'll be possible for somebody, and we'll come to that in a second, to go to the Ethereum blockchain or a reporting node that's been monitoring it and get all the opening balances of all the people who've ever bought an EOS token. And that ledger of account balances becomes the opening balance for any chain that wants to claim to be the main chain.
Understood.
Does that help?
Yes. Thank you. It's kind of tied to the first question, so that helps. One last question. So you changed or mentioned that there might be a change in voting, staking for CPU. And so staking for RAM and EOS storage are not flexible. You cannot use those tokens for voting. Is there potentially a change on those two as well?
Everything is subject to change.
Okay.
Having said that, my belief is we're fairly firm that tokens that are staked for CPU and tokens that are staked for network bandwidth are both available to be voted. Liquid tokens are available to be bought and sold, therefore cannot be voted. And RAM is if you don't need the memory and you free it up and then you unstake it, which happens instantaneously, are also available to be traded. So it becomes really messy from a software perspective to, like, you can open yourself up to weird double spends and all kinds of craziness. So what we want is the network and CPU are the two that make sense to double use. So if you use either of those, then you can vote them. That's the current planning.
You're locked in. It makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
And then you can only ask for more CPU or more bandwidth once a day, and you pay whatever the market rate is. And then when you're done, you say, I want to release some or all. And the ones you release come back to you 3 days later in a lump sum.
Anybody want to go next?
Yes, I have one more question. Can I ask last developer question? Thomas, I talked to two teams, actually, two interesting projects based on Eastern Europe. One is building an exchange on top of EOS platform, and another one you have a very interesting idea. They're trying to build something like Airbnb on a blockchain, and they choose EOS as ideal platform.
As everyone should.
Like everyone should, and I agree, right? Some of the questions that they asked me to ask the call today is how stable is API? Are we pretty much finalized in terms of how API will look? Are we gonna see some significant changes before we go live?
Hugh Bart.
There are significant changes that are going to come down as part of our next testnet release. After that, you should see that API become rock solid stable from a contract developer's perspective. The things that will still be up in the air at that 3.0 release are all what we would call governance issues at this point. So all the things that that Thomas has been talking about, all the staking mechanics that he said were up in the air, we currently have where we think we're going to go, but those are still subject to change after the 3.0 release because we want to get that right for the mainnet launch, and they can be upgraded because they're all kind of hosted by a contract in and of themselves. But other than how you attain resources, for now we're planning on the testnet running on kind of like a faucet mentality where, as a developer, if you need more bandwidth or storage or whatever, we're just going to give it to you because it's testnet. You're supposed to be testing contracts. Everything past that, what you would do in order to interact with the chain, interact with your users, interact with other accounts, should be pretty stable after that release. So that will give them some amount of lead time before the launch of the main chain to develop contract code where we won't necessarily rip the carpet out from underneath them. So I think if you were to look at the state of either our 2.0 or our master branch right now, you would find that there's still going to be a little bit of chop between now and the 3.0 release, but the 3.0 release should serve as an extremely stable platform for people to build off of as far as the contract developer APIs are concerned. The contract developer experience is something that we want to improve continually over time, and that can be done without necessarily changing anything about the way the consensus mechanisms work on the chain. So what they might want to have written their contract like a year from now, it might be very different looking because the best practices will have slid into something more convenient. The standard libraries would have been updated to support better and more efficient paradigms, all that kind of thing that we can do at the contract level as we learn from the community and trade information. Those will continue to improve over time. So there will be some moving target as far as best practices are concerned, but it won't be changes that would force your hand to upgrade a DApp that you have built on the chain. Any DApp that you built based on the 3.0 code when we launched the next testnet is something that we intend for you to be able to immediately relaunch when the community chain, the community mainnet chain launches, and support for the lifetime of the chain.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And just to be sure people understand, it's actually kind of a big deal that a lot of our system contract code, our core code, actually runs as smart contracts, which means because we can upgrade smart contracts in place, that means we can upgrade the system without a hard fork. And you should all be going, oh my God, that's so cool. Because
a lot of the governance changes that can be enacted. So if the community doesn't like something 6 months into this and they say the way you're staking and voting doesn't quite make sense, there's this vector, or we want to improve it by this method, there is a legitimate path for upgrading that doesn't require a hard fork in the network. So everyone who has a wallet, a node,
all the stuff that Bitcoin is freaking out over, and Ethereum's like, should we return lost coins? It's just not going to be an issue.
Right.
Huge. I had a question, that people have asked about the EOS file system, some things that I brought up. It's kind of a gray area, and that is, and it's really a problem with IPFS. But when Dan said, watching the images that are on the network, looking at the fingerprinted strings for IPFS and scanning that are kind of up to the individual block producer. How they watch that is up to them, or they are unable to watch that. That's just a clarification, maybe part technical, part governance, that you and Bart could contribute to give some clarification about those questions.
Bart, would you mind?
Well, specifically, all of the EOS storage stuff that would back end onto IPFS is probably going to come online after the the June launch. Most of that can be done in the user space. It will, it won't be a hard fork because it will be decided by the community when the community votes in producers that back up the IPFS data. So we will have the ability to write a contract from day one that that allows, you know, IPFS mappings and things like that, and interoperability with that layer. We won't have that contract necessarily written, nor will we have a set of producers that is already guaranteed to host the data for you in a redundant fashion to keep it there. But all those things can come online as basically as the code matures and as we solve some of these problems.
Those are the EOS file system is not going to be launched when the mainnet launches.
I believe right now the plan is not to have that support present in June. It won't require a hard fork to put it in, but I don't think it will be. I don't think it will be ready for people to depend on for any production capacity by then. I could be wrong, but at this point, I would wager that that's going to be a kind of beta feature at the time we launch, and it will bloom into something that is usable as the chain gains a little more traction and a little more time.
So this is kind of a question that popped up in governance for Thomas, and that is, if the EOS file system is launched, the talks right now are that if you remove a file, then that might be grounds, and you don't go through an arbitrator. You remove it because of your local municipality or government, wherever the block producer is located. That could be grounds to be removed as a block producer. Is that correct, Thomas, or is that just still up in the air?
It's not quite like that.
Okay.
We fully expect that every block producer has to do two things. It has to satisfy the needs of the chain and the users and the contract, whatever the agreement turns out to be between block producers and token holders. And also have to deal with the fact that they live in a jurisdiction and they've got rules they need to follow and honor, and that's kind of important. And it's entirely possible that of 21 producers, there's some file that your jurisdiction doesn't like. It's just content they don't care for. I can't think of an example I can give that won't offend somebody, so I'll just let you use your imagination. Okay, so if 20 of 21 host the file and I don't, plus that's IPFS, it could be anywhere. When you address that file and ask for it, you should get it. And as long as what you're doing as a block producer is, look, I have no choice, it's my jurisdiction, and it's like 1% of files, and I'm otherwise a really good guy, you're probably not going to lose votes. It's definitely not an automatic, red card penalty, you're on the sidelines kind of a thing.
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That clarifies, because I know Eric had brought that up and some of us were unsure, and I was trying to just get clarity for the community on that particular issue.
In part, IPFS is a future, not a current. So it's far enough out that we're really not quite sure. And when it comes to hosting files, because IPFS is distributed and redundant, unless your actions are hurting enough people and or your actions are like somehow demonstrating bad faith, if you're a good faith actor and it's a couple of files, it's probably nothing that anyone's going to mind. Is my belief. It's my expectation.
That makes sense.
I had a question about basically native token migration, and then
Your name and your group.
Sir, Brandon Hughes, EOS Denver. So my question was around, I'm seeing some discussion in terms of what that's going to look like. I've seen within a Telegram summary that Dan's talking about having an iOS or an iPhone wallet. So is that going to coincide with the launch of the mainnet? Is it going to be prior? And is that going to be integrated into the token migration where you have the ERC20 that you're snapshotting, and then you automatically populate that into a registered iOS or mobile wallet that you're going to have along with that? I guess, what is the mechanism for getting the native tokens, and is that going to be in your MyEther wallet or in the address? How are you going to where they
Gotcha. So Bart knows better than me the status of the walleting and the security.
Right. So when the the ERC20 coin freezes, at that point, the idea is that everyone who holds tokens, who has registered an EOS public key for us to use to create kind of a shell account and fund, and then they can use the private side of that public key to then command that shell account and also their initial allocation of tokens. Because of the technical limitations at the time we deployed the ERC20 contract, the only valid registered public keys are all K1 curves, which is not what Apple's Secure Enclave supports, nor Android's Secure Enclave. We added support for the R1 elliptic curve after that. So right now, the only valid keys would not be the Apple hardware keys. The very first thing you could do upon recovering your account from the R1 key, which would probably be hosted by you would access that through an EOS-based wallet, not necessarily my Ether wallet. At the time it freezes, our attachment to Ethereum is done. We're using it as a read-only source of data. You'll no longer really need those keys. I'll put an asterisk right there and come back to it in just 1 second. But you would have registered an EOS public key, so use an EOS-based wallet to use the private side of that key, which hopefully you stored, to
Please, yes.
Yeah, please store it. If not, update that public key now and store that private key. You would use that to manipulate the account we create for you. And the very first thing you could do with that account is change the keys that authorize that account to be something that exists on your, Apple hardware wallet. I don't know if the actual pretty version of that app is going to make it by June. We already have the proof of technical feasibility. It's just all the nice wrapping that makes that really useful. So hopefully, if not at launch, shortly after, we will have that nice Chrome on top of a native app that would allow you to sign transactions with that enclave.
Don't say Chrome, that's Android.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant like the technical version of Chrome, not like the software product. But okay, a nice layer on top of the ability to technically sign with that hardware enclave. So you won't be able to instantly claim with it, but you should be only one step off from being able to use a strictly hardware wallet that you carry around in your pocket at all times. Jumping back to the asterisk real quick, let's say for some reason you've missed the boat and you haven't actually registered a public key. We get to the end. That doesn't necessarily invalidate you. We should still be able to have you prove to us that you have agency over the Ethereum public key, Ethereum public address that the snapshot is currently sitting in, and then still be able to get your tokens to you. That's going to be a less convenient method than having registered a public key. So number one, please register a public key. But if you don't, it's not going to be a situation where you're suddenly out a whole bunch of EOS tokens because of some sort of technical limitation. We have a pathway for you to cryptographically prove that you are in fact that Ethereum address. So as long as the snapshot says that Ethereum address has EOS tokens, there should be a way to get you these tokens. The exact details of that are still kind of in the works. They'll be there by June. And Thomas will probably be taking point on relaying that to the community once we figure it all out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question. So is there going to be like there's going to be like
go a little closer.
I was wondering if there's going to be like a mapping between your MyEther wallet and the new EOS-based wallet that's being created. So you said it's cryptographically, you would know that the bridge works. And when what will happen to the existing tokens in the MyEther wallet? What will happen? Is that still in the works, or?
Not quite sure I understand the question.
You said that
If you'd come closer, Guy, that would help.
very close.
Like stand up here next to the microphone would be super.
I was just wondering that when you're migrating your existing tokens from MyEther wallet to the new EOS wallet, how would you said that the mapping of the public address would the system would know, right? Like that this wallet on EOS or on Ethereum has X amount of EOS tokens. The same would be replicated on EOS.
Right.
Yeah.
As part of the ICO contract that we have on Ethereum right now, there is an endpoint where you can come in and associate your EOS key, your EOS address with your Ethereum account. There will be no if you do that, there will be no active process by which you migrate your tokens. When the chain launches correctly, after the Genesis process and the community has actually launched the chain, there should be an EOS account sitting there somewhere waiting for you, and we'll have an ability for you to look up that account that will essentially be authorized by the EOS public key that you registered with that crowd sale. So there's no active path for you to migrate those coins. They're just going to be sitting there waiting for you when the chain launches, and you'll be able to use the private side of that public key that you register with us to then act as that account. And the first thing you might want to do is create a new account with a better name, because we'll probably give them random names or something like that. And second thing you might want to do is upgrade the key on the account to be a hardware wallet key, all those kind of things. That's actually an account that you would own on the EOS chain by virtue of having the private side of the public key that you registered. That's all going to be handled automatically for you. The only active process you would have to go through is if there is some sort of mishap. You didn't register a public key, and now you have to go through kind of like the long path of proving to the EOS chain that you are the one that has the private key for the Ethereum public account. That process is what we haven't quite nailed down yet, but it would be something where you would have to use something like My Ether Wallet to sign a message with your private key and then post that to the EOS chain via some facility that many people have provided you out of the goodness of their heart. That would go to a centralized location.
Smart contract, probably.
Yeah, and go to the location where we're basically holding all of those unclaimed tokens in trust, waiting for someone to show up saying, "Here, I've got the secret that proves that I was actually owed these keys." Or sorry, owed these coins, and then we would release it to whatever account you basically signed from My Ether Wallet. So there will be some active process if you skip the automated process.
So we've got about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
So does anybody else
want to ask you a follow-up?
got 5 minutes?
Oh, sure. No, I was just wondering that the upgrade process, that how is that tied to governance? Like, I know Tezos, there was the community could provide a proposal and people vote with the Tezos tokens. It's like, I was wondering if there's any process where that the community can propose upgrades to the network, and of course, Blockwind is also going to be doing systematic upgrades until the chain is stable. I was wondering how.
Right. So the upgrade process is really straightforward, and even Block One is going to continue to be a software developer, and we're going to offer patches, but it's going to be up to the community which patches you accept, and the process is very straightforward. At the initial launch, there'll be proposal X, and each block producer can say, I believe in proposal X or not. And you'll probably do it based on a vote of the tokens, because otherwise you risk being on the wrong side of the voters. And if 15 block producers all agree with this change, and that you agree for 30 continuous days that there's a supermajority in favor of it, then it gets scheduled to be upgraded. And then every node that doesn't have it has 7 days to upgrade. And after that, if you haven't upgraded and you're a read-only node out there somewhere, you'll get disconnected from the network.
And that is only in the case of a hard forking change.
That's a hard fork change.
Changes.
Soft fork change is just 30 days, supermajority in favor of it, and then it just gets inserted as a code update. That's without a fork.
So is it telling you that the meeting's going to end in 4 minutes on your side? Or?
Yeah, it says remaining time 2 minutes 30 seconds. It's Zoom has this thing if you're not on a paid account.
He's actually doing that right now. If we get disconnected, we could just join back the link, and it should be able to do it for you. I apologize, guys.
Yeah, just be a 2-part recording is fine. I'm happy with that. You might need a new meeting ID. I'm not sure how it works.
Cool. Did anybody else have any questions? You have 2 minutes. So I guess we will probably break here in like 2 minutes and send out another link. You guys maybe 5-10 minutes, and we'll re-invite you that's a problem. He's actually trying to do that right now. So.
Okay, I'll be looking at my email and my chat window for the next link ID.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys in a minute. So I'm trying to figure out to ask a question kind of about the migration as well, and just kind of the issue with obviously U.S. citizens not being involved with the ICO, picking them up on secondary exchanges. Is it going to be an issue for us to own these tokens? You know, kind of like we were talking about last night. Trying to figure out when do we ask that question.
Well, he also said basically EOS public key. Is that the same as your MyEther key or Ethereum address?
I don't know. I feel like I'd like to try to get some more clarification from them on this migration.
Yeah, sure.